Welcome, everyone, and today I have a really exciting guest. His work includes being on the wide world of sports, NASCAR Today, Wind Tunnel with Dave Despain, and of course, the Dave Despain Show. My guest is, of course, Dave Despain. Dave, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, and I send out my best wishes to everybody who's struggling through these difficult times. It's a weird old world that we live in. Right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Well, my first question for you is, so your resume is really vast, but how did it all begin? How did you first get into motorsports reporting?
It's such a long and bizarre story, but the short version of it is that I was a failed motorcycle racer. That's what I really wanted to do, was
Mm-hmm.
be Grand National Champion. My career earnings were $35, I think. So after 5 or 6 years, I realized this may not work out. I may have to get a job. And I did get a job with the sanctioning body for the motorcycle races. And in that capacity, went to Daytona for the Daytona 200. And ABC Wide World of Sports showed up at the last minute to broadcast the race, to televise the race. It was hugely exciting for all of us who were constantly seeking more attention for motorcycle racing.
Mm-hmm.
They did not have an expert analyst. And my boss, one of the consummate BSers of all time, looked the producer in the eye and said, "You should use our guy Dave. He's got a lot of electronic media experience." Well, that's true. I had worked at a 250-watt daytime radio station in Iowa when I was just out of high school. That was my electronic media experience. And the producer said, "Tell you what, go with that cameraman, go down and stand on pit road, and in 45 seconds, tell somebody who doesn't know anything about motorcycle racing why they should watch the Daytona 200.
Mm-hmm.
I can do that." So I went down there and looked at the camera and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, today an international field of jockey-sized athletes have gathered here at the legendary Daytona International Speedway. They'll circulate those high banks, those famed pathways of Richard Petty and all the NASCAR superstars at close to 200 miles an hour, protected only by their crash helmet and a thin layer of cowhide. This is a race you do not want to miss." And it was 43 and a half seconds. And the guy looked at it and went, "You're hired." And so my first television show was standing beside Keith Jackson back when they had those gold blazers with the ABC. You wouldn't remember this. You weren't born then. With the ABC crest on the pocket. We looked like Century 21 agents. And we called the Daytona 200. And so my television career is down to just being in the right place at the right time, and my boss being a really magnificent bullshitter.
I was really impressed with that pitch. Usually, whenever a friend asks me about like NASCAR, I'm usually the guy that rambles for like a couple of hours. Then like the next week, I come up and I'm like, I haven't even touched on Michael Waltrip yet, you know. So I'm already.
Well, it's good. Sometimes it's good to be brief.
Mm-hmm.
Don't have a lot to say. Just have a lot to say.
Mm-hmm. So from your pit reporting to Wind Tunnel, Inside NASCAR Cup, Dave Despain Show, out of all the stuff you've been a part of, was there a particular show or maybe even format that you enjoyed the most being a part of?
That's a tough call. Can I have three?
Mm-hmm.
First would be the motorcycle races that I got to do, because that was the whole reason I got into it
Mm-hmm.
to start with. So those were always special and rare enough that they remain special through 40-some years that I did it. And then it's probably a tie for first between the Thursday night, sometimes Saturday night Thunder shows with the USAC stuff up in Indiana and Wind Tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of for the same reasons. I mean, those were both brand new things to me. I had never been exposed to USAC racing. All my racing experience when I actually started in the business was with bikes. So it was needed to be a pretty steep learning curve. And the other thing is, they were both live,
Mm-hmm.
and live TV is just way more fun than tape TV. It just is.
Yeah, when we first started, I was telling you about how it felt like calling into the show, and we were talking about how with when you're dealing with live callers, you never know what you're going to get on the other side of that phone call. So that's one thing I always loved about Wind Tunnel was I was like, you don't know what's no matter what's scripted to happen, you never know what's about to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not just wind tunnel phone-ins.
Mm-hmm.
That's universal in live TV. I mean, things can go sideways in a really big hurry, and your job is to basically perform in such a fashion that nobody knows it happened. The folks don't never realize how close you were to hitting the fence.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that's exciting. It's an adrenaline rush. It's a bit like racing.
Mm-hmm.
Far removed from racing in that the consequences are not nearly as physical, but there's something about having egg on your face in front of a couple of million people that it inspires you, it motivates you.
Mm-hmm. So for me growing up, I was blessed enough to have a dad and a granddad that they loved NHRA, they loved NASCAR, IndyCar, and all. And even locally, we had a mud bog, we had a flat track for motorcycles. So I got to grow up respecting all forms of motorsports. And I think that's something that Wind Tunnel did a really good job of doing for their viewers is offering insight not only into a NASCAR but also IndyCar, motorcycles, etc. Why do you think it's a good idea for race fans to not just stay in their own bubble and form this us versus them? Like if I love motorcycles, then I gotta hate NASCAR, or if I love NHRA, I gotta hate whatever.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure where that comes from, but I definitely feel strongly that people should get over that.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I'm jealous of your upbringing. I had none of that. My parents had no connection to motorsports. I'm really not sure where my interest in racing came from. I'm not proud to admit that we were street racers when I first got into the motorcycle world, and fortunately we kind of got over that. Built a racetrack in southeast Iowa that was pretty successful at an amateur level,
Mm-hmm.
cycle track, and then started going to the big pro races in the area, and ultimately decided to go racing ourselves. Some did better than that than others. I wasn't among these did better than that group. But anyway, back to your question. I've always felt very strongly that should be part of every motorsports fan's sort of education process. It was mine, and so I tried to pass that on. And the other thing was that the network felt that the show should be very broad-based in terms of what we covered. Partly maybe in concession to me because I wanted to make sure there was plenty of motorcycle stuff in there. But they covered other forms of racing. They felt that they had a stake in other forms of racing. I distinctly remember the executive producer telling me one time, your ratings aren't very good right now, and I'm telling you that because you shouldn't be worried about it. And I kind of laughed. I said, well, that doesn't sound like typical television talk. He said, Wind Tunnel is the kind of, how do you put it? Racing is in the DNA of this network, and part of that DNA is a show like yours. So we need to do it regardless of how many people watch. And I found that encouraging. You just miss so much if you only focus on one piece of motorsports. There's so many fascinating things. People get attracted to racing for a lot of reasons. Maybe it's the drivers. Maybe it's the mechanics of it. Maybe it's just the competition. But that's universal. You'll find that in every form of racing. So I just hate to see fans miss the good things that are outside their little realm of interest, number one. And number two, I really, really hate fans wasting their time arguing with each other about whether or not their respective disciplines are worthy of respect. They're all worthy of respect. Get out there and do something new, That's been my attitude all along, and seems to have worked out.
Hmm. I would agree. I know even for me in the just the NASCAR world alone, I know so many people that they're solely an Earnhardt fan. So if Junior's doing bad, they're not even watching, and I'm sitting here and I'm the guy that even if my favorite driver doesn't win, I'm sitting there pulling for Corey LaJoie and thinking, oh cool, he got another top 25 finish, or this small team did this, and I'm like, even in that series, if you're just pulling for your own, you're just that one driver in something, the racing's not good or he's not doing good, you're gonna suffer. And that's how I look in motorsports, because maybe my guys aren't doing well in NASCAR. That's why I can turn to NHRA and be like, oh man, my guys are doing good here, or man, IndyCar is doing really well. And that's just something I appreciate, like I said, growing up, but also watching your show. And I know even as a NASCAR fan, I think sometimes we're elitist, so sometimes it was nice being reminded we're not the only sport out there.
It's just kind of a personal thing with me too, but I've always felt that from a driver's standpoint, one of the most important measures of greatness, there's always this who's the greatest conversation in all forms of sport, and certainly in ours. Who are the four faces that should be on the Mount Rushmore of motorsports? And I've always thought that versatility ranked really, really high in terms of my yardstick for measuring greatest of all time. If you only drove stock cars or only drove Indy cars or only drove sprint cars or only drove whatever, to me that's a bit limiting.
Yeah.
So, Steve Kinser, for all his incredible, championship records, to me would not rank as high as Mario won, Indy and the World Championship and or even AJ, who with his level of versatility. And the guy that hits it out of the park for me in that regard, again, I've got a soft spot for him because his first love was motorcycles, but Dan Gurney, because he not only drove the hell out of them, but he built his own car and won, the Belgian Grand Prix, I guess. That's real versatility there. So I think that just having an interest in all kinds of motorsports is a benefit to anybody who cares about any single kind of motorsport.
So throughout your entire career, there was so much that happened. There was monumental victories. There were devastating tragedies. Is there a story, or maybe stories that stand out to you as the most memorable? I guess either this underdog does this, or you have to now go on the air and report this news, and you're like, wow, I don't know how to talk about this, or whatever.
Yeah, Earnhardt's death certainly, Senna's death. But I guess now that I'm so far removed from it, I tend to think of it in broader terms. And so what is striking to me is the change that those deaths made in the racing world in terms of safety. And, it's almost a cliche. NASCAR particularly has always been, very fond of bragging about how safe their race cars were, even though they weren't very safe until Earnhardt's death. It's phenomenal I don't have the statistic in front of me, but it's phenomenal to compare the rate at which Formula One drivers died prior to the weekend when Senna was killed and the deaths since then. It's like death was virtually eliminated as an element in the sport and had been the dominant element in the sport up until that time. So it was as much as we talk about how Earnhardt changed American racing, Senna's death changed the racing world, and obviously much for the better. So that's one of the big ones. The other one is the kind of corporate takeover of racing, if you will. When I started, it was still pretty much Joe's Garage, sponsoring the cars. And the big change came in '72, right after I got into when I went to work for the motorcycle sanctioning body, and that was R.J. Reynolds coming with the tobacco money that transformed lots of forms of racing.
Mm-hmm.
Here we think of stock cars and Winston Cup, but if you look at what the cigarette money did for European Grand Prix motorcycle racing, it was phenomenal. And there were there are a lot of elements to that, good and bad. Obviously, we know the damage now that smoking causes. We know the reasons why it's no longer part of the sport and shouldn't be, in my opinion. I don't have any problem with that. But as the cigarette money diminished and the other corporate money came in, it really changed the way drivers behave. And I suppose for the most part for the better, but I miss some of the old-fashioned, down and dirty, rough and tumble. I mean, it was a pretty, well, I'm not sure I've got the right word at hand, but it was a pretty rough and tumble world, and there's a lot of appeal in that.
Yeah.
We've lost a lot of that. I guess, if nothing else, I'd just like to hear a winner interview that didn't include a sponsor, list. Tell me how it feels to win the fill-in-the-blank race.
Yeah.
Don't tell me how much you appreciate, Ajax making it possible. We know that. We can read the car. We can read your cap. We can read your suit. Tell me something I care about hearing. And that message just never seems to get through either to the competitors or to their sponsors, which is startling to me. I would think the sponsors' focus groups would tell them that's not what they want to hear.
Yeah.
Now, this is not about corporate ego. They want to hear from a driver who has some personality. So that's, to me, another huge trend that evolved over time. And then, of course, television. I mean, that's, was when I started, the Daytona 200 on Wide World of Sports was a shocking thing. And now there's motorcycle racing everywhere on TV. You got to dig a lot to find it. But if there's a kind of racing that you like, chances are there's somebody out there with a camera pointed at it. And the pay-per-view thing is, it's come about 15 years later than I predicted it would, but we finally reached the point where if you're willing to pony up, the price of a ticket, a couple of beers and a couple of hot dogs, you can watch an awful lot of racing on any given weekend.
Yeah, we recently I got to interview David Stremme, and we talked about the NBS 24/7 show they had, and there's been a couple of people that, and it's crazy because I was born in 92, so I'm like 27 years old, and a lot of people that follow my page, they'll be like 13, 14, 15, and when I talk about like, yeah, there was a reality show because when I was a fan, I had to tune in on Friday to get the scoop on what was happening. And then I had to wait for my NASCAR Scene magazine to come in the mail every week so I could read about the race. And nowadays they think that's crazy because they're like, well, I can go on, so-and-so's Twitter and check out everything I need to about the team and all of that. And they just, for them, that's crazy to think of a time where you didn't have all that stuff. And yeah, like I said, I know every Wednesday I'd get out of school and I would go home and the rest of the night I'd just be reading every word in the NASCAR Scene magazine and then tuning in Friday to get all the scoop before the race, and then Sunday and Monday tuning in to Wind Tunnel and then like the Monday night shows to get what happened, why did this guy, what happened to his car at the end of the race and all.
It's a huge improvement, and it's opened doors for so many people, so many series and types of racing that would never be on television to, have that opportunity now. It also rewards the diehard fan. They, if you're a sprint car fan, and you live in Pennsylvania, that's great. If you're a sprint car fan and you live in Georgia, then maybe not so great. You might have to travel a little further to go see the races. But lo and behold, there they are on the big screen. So that's a huge, and I think long overdue, application of technology to our sport that I think is a big benefit for everybody.
Mm-hmm. So finally, for those wanting to be a commentator or an interviewer in the world of motorsports, what's some advice that you would offer to them?
I get that question a lot, and going back to the first question you asked me, I have no advice to offer
Mm-hmm.
because I got into it totally by accident. Do you go to broadcast school? I don't know. I see announcers who come out of broadcast school. I guess I've struggled with this question every time somebody's asked me, and I've been asked it many times over the years. But I guess I would sum up with, number one, learn how to write.
Mm-hmm.
Learn how to write a story, because that's ultimately all you're going to do when you get into the reporting business. You become a storyteller. And if you can write the story, if you can sit down with a keyboard and write the story, then it's just instinctive. You're going to have the ability to tell that story, but you've got to learn to write it first. And there are a lot of reasons why that's true, having to do with how your brain retains information and so forth. But if you can write a good story, and one of the keys to that is write it and then rewrite it and then rewrite it again, and take out all the extra fluff and get it boiled down. Because when you get into the TV business and they tell you 45 seconds, typically they mean 45 seconds. So you're not going to get a minute and a half. You got to be able to get it done in a hurry. So that's number one in terms of your, developing your bag of tricks. Secondly is getting into the environment, find a way into the pits. Volunteer to be the pit PA person. You volunteer to be the social media coordinator for the local, late model team. Whatever it takes to get into the game. It may not be anywhere close to what you want to do down the long haul, but it will help you learn the sport, learn how it works, learn what works and what doesn't. PA announcing is a magnificent way to learn how to be a commentator. That's the route I came up, and again, it wasn't with any plan to eventually turn it into a TV career. I just loved doing it. I thought PA announcing was the coolest thing in the world. The difference was it paid $200 a week, where TV pays a couple times more than that. I guess that's pretty much the list. And then never screw up. Don't when you get that opportunity, when you create that opportunity for yourself, make the most of it. Be good. Be prepared. Chris Economaki is the ultimate yardstick in my mind for broadcasters. And once I was about to interview him for a documentary, and they were setting the lights and the cameras, and that always takes a few minutes, and I jokingly asked Chris if he had done anything to get ready for this interview. And he looked at me kind of scornfully, and he said, in that wonderful accent of his, and of course he was deaf, so he shouted it loud enough for everybody in the building to hear, "Dave, I don't get ready. I stay ready." And I thought that spoke volumes right there. Always be ready to deliver a good performance. And if you can do all those things, you'll make it.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate you joining us. If there's anything you would like to plug or anything, the floor is yours. I don't know if you have any projects or just anything you enjoy that you want to plug.
If anybody out there is really, really good with a box blade and can give me some information on how to operate a box blade more effectively, that would be helpful. I am a totally retired, pretend-like farmer, maintaining my driveway with a tractor and a box blade, and I'm not very good yet with the box blade. So, post up. I'd love to know how to run a box blade. No, I don't have anything to you're going to hear plenty of people on the media making a pitch for something. You don't need to hear it from me.
I really enjoyed that, because I'm used to either someone shouting out their sponsors or whatever, and I was like, man, that's just This whole interview is kind of goes back to just being honest, being yourself, not being corporate. I was like, that's the perfect answer. It's just, hey, anyone got any tips for this?
Yeah, I think that I think the world might be a better place sometimes if there weren't sponsors. I love seeing drivers, competitors making the kind of money that they deserve to make for what they do. That's long overdue, but we pay a pretty high price for that, I think, in a lot of ways. So yeah, I'm happy to be done with all that. I just go out and drive my tractor and smile and think about all the great memories, some of which you've reminded me of today, and I appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much.